All right, now we're going to talk about some of the social and emotional development. Now, these are critical factors. We all want to make sure we're giving the child's heart and soul what it needs to develop, and not just developing its mind in a kind of mathematical robot sort of way. We want to create people with a very robust sense of well-being and who are resilient and kind and able to form good connections. So we're going to look at a bunch of different theories, and we're going to take a little bit from each one of them so that we can kind of create this whole understanding of what's important during early childhood. All right, now we're going to talk about some of the social and emotional development. Now, these are critical factors. We all want to make sure we're giving the child's heart and soul what it needs to develop, and not just developing its mind in a kind of mathematical robot sort of way. We want to create people with a very robust sense of well-being and who are resilient and kind and able to form good connections. So we're going to look at a bunch of different theories, and we're going to take a little bit from each one of them.
All right, so the entire purpose of this is to ensure healthy development of the baby and also to optimize that development so that we can ensure that they get through their developmental stages so that they reach adult life with a robust set of life skills to rely on. Persistence, grit, individuality, independence, connection, all these great things that make a healthy and thriving adult. This is what we're going to empower them with while they're in their early childhood development, 0 to 3. So, in order to create a robust sense of well being, you're probably already instinctively doing a lot of the necessary things. Mother Nature has equipped us all to thrive naturally. It's in our genes. It's what we're pre-programmed with. It's probably what your parents did for you, hopefully. But like I said, a lot of this will probably come quite naturally to you. The reason why it's important to go over these theories and learn these lessons is so that we can understand where the child is at developmentally and kind of have like a insider's view on where they're at and how they process and how they see the world in order for us to meet them where they're at and really provide the optimal care to help them succeed and successfully conquer the stage that they're at so that they can advance and progress onto the next stage of development in a healthy way. We don't want to have situations of arrested development where people later in life have issues that manifest from needs that weren't met in early childhood. So we're going to look at the course description here where we cover a little bit more. Like I said, we're going to look at the different theories, we're going to take lessons from each, and we're going to cover our suggestions. And like we said, you're probably already doing a lot of these things instinctively, but we do want to help you understand to identify where they're at, to understand why it's important to interact in particular ways, and sometimes just to help make it a little less frustrating to deal with these little creatures because of course we love them so much, but gosh, it can be frustrating. And understanding what's going on and where they're at can make it a lot less frustrating and a lot easier for us to remain calm, kind, and loving towards them. So the first person that we're going to learn about, the first theory, is Vygotsky. Now, according to Vygotsky, adults are a very important source of cognitive development. And what you're going to see with a lot of these different theories is you have the internal versus the external people. The people that say that our development is built up off our internal drives and processes, and the people that say that it's more social. It's more about the interaction with those around us. And of course, with everything, the truth does lie somewhere in the middle. Genetics does play an important role, but environment does also. So that's what we're going to focus on because environment is something that we have an effect on. So according to Vygotsky, social factors like your parents and your caregivers play a very crucial role in how you model and how you develop early on. Vygotsky was a trendsetter because a lot of people believed it was, more about the environment, not so much about the interaction with your caregivers. So we'll watch a great video here that talks a little bit more about Vygotsky and kind of gets more into the details of his understandings. so that we can take away, stuff that we agree with, maybe stuff that we don't so much agree with, but just help us get a broader understanding for these developmental stages of the children.
Vygotsky's theory of social development argues that community and language play a central part in learning, while Jean Piaget concluded that children's cognitive development happens in stages. Vygotsky rejected his ideas and believed that children develop independently of specific stages as the result of social interactions. Vygotsky claimed that we are born with 4 elementary mental functions: attention, sensation, perception, and memory. It is our social and cultural environment that allows us to use these elementary skills to develop and finally gain higher mental functions. This development ideally happens in the zone of proximal development. First, there is what we can do on our own. Then, there is the zone of proximal development, which represents what we can do with the help of an adult, a friend, technology, or what Vygotsky called the more knowledgeable other. Last, there is what's beyond our reach. To illustrate this, let us think of twins who were raised in a community in which boys are expected to learn and succeed, while girls are only expected to be pretty. At the age of 10 months, both have the ability to crawl and are in the zone of proximal development for learning how to stand on their feet. The more knowledgeable other, in this case the father, provides the boy with opportunities to practice in a playroom that he has equipped with scaffolding and other objects. The boy is encouraged to explore the equipment, and eventually he uses it to pull himself up. A few hours later, he's cruising along the structures, and a few days later, he's standing on his feet. The girl also has the potential to stand, but does not receive any support in learning the skill. When we compare the two, we see that while the girl is still trying to get up, the boy has moved into a new zone. He knows how to balance while standing and now has the potential to learn how to walk. Both will eventually learn how to walk, but according to Vygotsky, the boy will be more skilled. The same principles apply to all learning and the development of higher cognitive functions, and only those learning with the assistance of a capable mentor can reach the full potential of their ability. Vygotsky therefore believed that inside the zone of proximal development, learning can precede development, which means that a child is able to learn skills that go beyond their natural maturity. He also established an explicit connection between speech and mental concepts, arguing that inner speech develops from external speech via a gradual process of internalization. This means that thought itself develops as a result of conversation. Therefore, younger children who don't finish this process can only think out loud. Once the process is complete, inner speech and spoken language become independent. Lev Vygotsky died of tuberculosis in 1934 at the age of 37. Despite his young age, he became one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. He left the following advice for educators. By giving students practice in talking with others, we give them frames for thinking on their own. What do you think? Can a child learn anything regardless of any developmental prerequisites? And do we learn only through social and cultural contexts? And if so, do you think it is appropriate for a more knowledgeable other to determine what a child should learn next? Share your thoughts in the comments below.
So fascinating. That's why we chose to start off with him. Next, we're going to move on to Bandura. Now, Albert Bandura's social learning theory states that human behavior is driven by observation and imitation. So more of the social aspect of learning. And then he also talks about your motivation. So what's motivating you to imitate what you observe? These are all really important concepts, so let's jump into it.
What do you think? Can we only learn through direct experience, or also from studying others? Psychologist Albert Bandura came up with an interesting experiment to answer that exact question and form a theory. Bandura came up with the social learning theory in the 1960s, a time dominated by scholars who didn't believe Bandura's idea and argued that learning was always the result of classical and operational conditioning. To prove that children can learn by mere observation, Bandura came up with the Bobo doll experiments, a set of controversial studies which involved preschool children, adult models, and a stand-up punch doll. In the first set of experiments, the children were seated alone in a corner of the room. From there, they observed an adult actor aggressively kicking and scolding the Bobo doll for about 10 minutes. Afterwards, the same child was put into a new playroom where another adult deliberately frustrated the child by taking away the toys the child played with. The frustrated child was then put back into the room with the Bobo doll, where Bandura and his team made the following 3 observations. 1. Children who initially saw the adult punching the doll often copied the behavior. 2. Boys were 3 times more likely to do so. 3. Boys reproduced the behavior twice as often if they observed a man do it compared to boys who observed a female actor. Girls were also more influenced by same-sex models. To find out if movies would have the same effect, Bandura let some children watch the model live and others watch it on video, or as a cartoon animation. As all 3 groups showed similar responses, Bandura concluded that children imitate others regardless of where they have seen the behavior. In the last variation of the experiments, Bandura wanted to know if the children would act differently when the models were reinforced or punished for their behavior towards the doll. Now, the children first saw the actor hit the doll and then observed another adult enter the room. This second adult would then react to the actor. These last results showed that it did not make much of a difference to the children whether the aggressor was praised or not. However, the kids who saw that the model was punished displayed much less aggression later, an effect which was especially true for girls. In other words, seeing others being rewarded does not necessarily motivate us to copy their behavior. Seeing others being punished, on the other hand, can significantly diminish our will to copy it. The fact that Bandura was able to prove that children also learn by observing others was a breakthrough in psychology. As a consequence of his findings, scholars and government officials argued that we should ban violence in films and games. Others suggested that the Bobo doll studies are not studies of aggression, but rather show that the children are simply motivated by the desire to please adults or act like them. Bandura and his co-author Richard Walters later defined 5 key tenets of the social learning theory. 1. Learning is a cognitive process that takes place in a social setting. 2. Learning can occur by observing behavior and the consequences of such. 3. Learning can happen without an observable change in behavior because we may learn without displaying what we have learned. 4. Reinforcements play a role but are not entirely responsible for learning. 5. Cognition, behavior, and environment all mutually influence each other, a process called reciprocal determinisms. Bandura, who in college attended a psychology course only to kill time, soon became passionate about the topic, and then one of the most cited psychologists in history. About reality, he said, "Most of the images of reality on which we base our actions are really based on vicarious experience." What do you think? How much of your learning comes from observing others? And if you learn socially, who are your greatest teachers?
Bandura, definitely one of the pioneers of learning theory. But now we're going to move on to a theory that we actually find particularly compelling, self-determination theory. Self-determination theory focuses on 3 core concepts or psychological needs that have to be fulfilled. That is competence, connection, and autonomy. And those 3 things together can motivate people to want to learn and grow. So when you think about competence, that is the ability to accomplish something. The the ability to handle whatever comes my way. Connection is our ability to be able to form connections that we need and sustain those connections and feel supported in a social framework throughout life. And then autonomy is what gives us the independence, the ability to go out on our own, as we are often, find ourselves handling things ourselves. We truly are the ones who have to overcome the obstacles for ourselves, even when we have people there cheering us on and helping us out. So much of our success will depend on our own autonomy and our sense of competence in that manner. So let's learn a little bit more about that.
Ask people for a blood donation and you might find many volunteers. Tell the same people that they'll get paid for it and many will now decline to help. Why do you think that might be? Self-determination theory argues that we do what we do because we are motivated by three basic needs that drive our behavior more than anything else. First comes autonomy. We desire to have the freedom of making our own choices and not be forced to do something we don't want. Second is competence. We want to feel that we have the skills required to do the work ourselves and not be confronted with tasks that we don't understand. Third is connection. We want to experience a sense of belonging, of being needed, and not feel useless or like an outsider. We can think of motivation ranging from non-self-determined to self-determined. On the left, we have amotivation. In the center, extrinsic motivation. And on the right, intrinsic motivation. In terms of quality, they range from lower forms to higher forms. Along this spectrum are, according to self-determination theory, 6 distinct types, represented here by Anton, Mary, Tai Chi, Abani, John, and Lalisa, who all have to study for a major exam. Anton does not understand the topic and therefore feels disconnected to the material. His need for competence remains unsatisfied and undermines his autonomy, leading him to lose control over the situation. As a result, he begins to think that school is pointless. He experiences amotivation. Mary likes to learn when she knows that if she does well, she will be rewarded. But when no one is around to stimulate her, she feels disconnected. Mary is not autonomous in her studies because she needs rewards that regulate her behavior externally, a job her mother usually does. This stage is called extrinsic motivation, externally regulated. Tai Chi strives to win or match the performance of others. When he's not among the top, his desires for competence and autonomy are not satisfied. He feels guilty when he can't be as good as others. The root of his behavior is therefore external. This stage is known as extrinsic motivation, introjected regulation. Abani values learning and sees herself as a good student. To her, getting good grades is important because it confirms her self-image. Despite the fact that she doesn't feel connected to the material, she does well because she regulates her behavior by identifying with the idea of being a good student. She's motivated by an ideal. This stage is called extrinsic motivation, regulation through identification. John thinks learning is important because it makes him a better human being. To develop his intellect and become the best version of himself, he tries to understand things, even if they are boring. He feels connected and competent. But since his behavior is regulated by the desire to live up to an idea, he is still not fully autonomous. This stage is known as extrinsic motivation, integrated regulation. Lalisa learns things because she is curious and enjoys it. She can feel completely connected to the material and often loses track of time. Studying gives her a deep sense of satisfaction. She experiences complete autonomy and as a result of her intrinsic interests, develops the highest forms of competence. Now we speak of intrinsic motivation. Regardless of where we are along the spectrum, we all have complex human minds with changing interests and conflicting desires. Doing one thing, we may feel fully motivated, autonomous, competent, and connected. But then, the next day, life gets in the way and robs us of our 3 basic needs. We feel nothing but amotivation. To regain your self-determination, you might want to take a break, seek a change in environment, or connect with other people. Self-determination theory was developed by the 2 American psychologists Richard Ryan and Edward Deci in the 1970s. More recent research points to some cultural differences. Many American students seem to learn to outcompete others. When Chinese study hard, it's often because they feel guilty if they do not meet expectations. On the interplay between extrinsic and intrinsic motivation, Deci said, "Sure, money motivates, but that's not the point. The point is that while money is motivating people, it is also undermining their intrinsic motivation." So what do you think about the model? Do you agree or disagree with the theory? And what do you think about extrinsic rewards? Share your thoughts in the comments below and let us know what motivated you to do so.
That's such an important concept. So moving on, we're going to talk about Ackerman and the whole child. Ackerman is a pioneer not too long ago who developed this theory based on 4 really important concepts: being me, us, the world, and human creations. So how does the child relate to those 4 major themes? And then within each theme, it can be broken down into how internally I feel about this and how does the external world affect how I feel about this. So let's go ahead and dive into this.
The idea of the whole child pays respect to the fact that there are many aspects of human potential that grades can't measure. Besides curiosity and intelligence, children may want to develop creativity, passion, resilience, intuition, confidence, generosity, mindfulness, humor, and many, many other important traits. Edith Ackerman's theory of the whole child development identifies 4 natural urges that drive our growth throughout childhood into adult life: being me, us, the world, and human creations. Each of these 4 urges can be divided into 2 subcategories. To understand them better, let's look at the theory from the perspective of a young girl. Being me is about learning to use my body and exploring my mind. The ability to control my body allows me to discover the world, and as a result, I can get to know where I'm at and who I am. By using my body, I put my 5 senses to work. This is how I learn to walk, speak, listen, and develop healthy habits. Soon, I might impress older folks with my clear speech, good posture, and other physical capabilities. Knowing myself helps me to develop a voice in my home and find my place in this world. It allows me to learn what I like, what I don't like, and what potential is still inside of me. By knowing who I am, I can understand my own subjectivity and form an identity I am proud of. Us is about how I relate to friends, family, and strangers, and my understanding of their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Let me begin with relating to others. As a child, I seek the love, attention, and respect from my parents. But I also have a fundamental natural urge to have social interactions with others. That means I need to learn to share and care so I can belong. One day, I want to become a respected member of a group while keeping my own identity. Understanding others is another thing. I want to learn about my friends and their emotions. Intentions, ways of thinking, and behaviors interest me. I want to learn to move away from my own limited point of view and integrate other people's perspective to develop a more complex understanding of morality and social problems. Making sense of the world means figuring out how things work. That's why we play. Through exploration, I quench my thirst for seeking logic and discover this universe. Adults call it exploring and investigating. We call it play. That's how we learn. Sometimes it gets messy, but by playing, I realize that some things change while others don't. In other words, I learn how things work. Later, I can become a real scientist who plays with big ideas and theories and explains the workings of this world to you. I am seeking logic all the time. Us children don't just want to discover how things work, we also look for consistency where there is little. To make sense of this world, we filter, interpret, and reconstruct what we experience into mental models. I think adults call them schema. This urge for order helps me to reorganize what I learn, infer rules, and apply fundamental laws in real life. Human Creations is about me being able to imagine alternatives in my head. If I can image something new, I am able to go and actually create it. Imaginating is one of humans' greatest achievements. Without imagination, all innovation would happen by chance. That's why I need fantasy and a lot of free time to play pretend. This way, I will learn to think out of the box. Through creations, I can express my thoughts and bring my imagination to life, and there are hundreds of ways to do so. I can create atmosphere with my voice, ideas with my head, and pictures that I paint with my hand. If I am given the space, I can create cozy rooms beneath the kitchen table, or one day, when I'm older, design an entire house. Edith Ackermann was born in Switzerland in 1946. After graduating, she became a protégé of Jean Piaget. At MIT Media Lab, where she spent most of her career, she was exploring the interactions between play, learning, and design. Whole child development, also known as holistic education, seeks to engage children in the whole of their being and potential. It assumes that each child arrives at this world with their own set of talents and interests that are to some degree completely independent from the child's upbringing. Some refer to this whole as the mind, body, and soul. The Swiss educator Pestalozzi referred to it as the hand, the heart, and the head. And further still, many others try to sum up a child in 4, 8 skills, social, emotional, and so forth. But does any such division actually pay respect to the whole? Does it capture a sense of humor, an appreciation of the arts, or the ability to be mindful? For this reason, the work of Ackermann offers a more wholesome perspective. What are your thoughts? Please share them in the comments below.
So next we'll talk about Winnicott. Winnicott was a pioneer based in the UK, had the idea of good enough caregiving. Winnicott was actually a physician who became a child development specialist, and he focused on this idea that the main things we need to do for children is to don't abandon them and don't retaliate to them or onto them when they're experiencing their tantrums or their outbursts. You have to remember your child's very vulnerable, and it's a scary world for them. Also, let your child be angry. Let them experience those big emotions. And to make sure that your child isn't too compliant. We don't want little robots who are afraid of independent thought and independent action. In a democratic society, we want people who are different, who contribute. We need diversity so that we can evolve. So Winnicott was a real pioneer, had hundreds of lectures over the radio for parents, developed this idea of the good enough mother, and that, it all starts from home as far as the development and lifetime projections for how somebody will experience their life. So without further ado, let's go ahead and check out more about Winnicott.
How do you build a better world? There are so many well-known, urgent places you might start. Malaria, carbon emissions, tax evasion, the drug trade, soil erosion, water pollution. Donald Winnicott deserves his place in history because of the dramatic simplicity of his approach. He proposed that the happiness of the human race depended ultimately not so much on external political issues, but on the way that parents bring up their children. Born in 1896, Winnicott was Britain's first medically trained child psychoanalyst. Although he had no children of his own, he played a crucial and devoted role in public education around child rearing, delivering some 600 talks on the BBC, tirelessly lecturing around the country, and authoring 15 books, among which the best-selling collection of essays, Home is Where We Start From. It was rather strange that Winnicott should even have been English, given that his country was notorious, then as now, for its lack of tenderness and its resistance to introspection. And yet, Winnicott's brand of psychoanalysis was, on closer inspection, peculiarly English. There was a characteristic English modesty about what he saw as the point of child psychoanalysis. His famous radio series was simply titled The Ordinary Devoted Mother and Her Baby. He wanted to help people to be, in his famous formulation, good enough parents, not brilliant or perfect ones, as other nations might have wished, but just okay. So what would it take in his eyes to encourage the good enough parent? Winnicott put forward a number of suggestions. Winnicott begins by impressing on his audience how psychologically fragile an infant is. It doesn't understand itself. It doesn't know where it is. It's struggling to stay alive. It has no way of grasping when the next feed will come. It can't communicate with itself or others. Winnicott's work never loses sight of this, and he therefore repeatedly insists that it's those around the infant who have to adapt so as to do everything to interpret the child's needs and not impose demands for which the child isn't yet ready. For example, Winnicott knew what violence, what hate there could be in a healthy infant. Referring to what happens if a parent forgets a feed, he cautioned, "If you fail him, it must feel to him as if the wild beasts would gobble him up." But though the infant might sometimes want to kill and destroy, it's vital for the parents to allow rage to expend itself, and for them not in any way to be threatened or moralistic about so-called bad behavior. As he put it, if a baby cries in a state of rage, and yet the people around him remain calm and unhurt, this experience greatly strengthens his ability to see what he feels to be true is not necessarily real. Parents are delighted when infants and children follow their rules. Such children are called good. Winnicott was very scared of good children. He believed that they were the children of parents who couldn't tolerate too much bad behavior and demanded compliance too early and too strictly. This would lead, in Winnicott's formulation, to the emergence of a false self, a persona that would be outwardly compliant, outwardly good, but was suppressing its vital instincts. In Winnicott's scheme, adults who can't be creative, who are somehow a little dead inside, are almost always the children of parents who've not been able to tolerate defiance, parents who've made their offspring good way before their time, thereby killing their capacity to be properly good, properly generous and kind. Every failure of the environment forces a child to adapt prematurely. For example, if the parents are too chaotic, the child will quickly try to overthink the situation. Its rational faculties are overstimulated. It may, in later life, try to become an intellectual. A parent who is depressed might unwittingly force the child to be too cheerful, giving it no time to process its own melancholy feelings. Winnicott saw the dangers in a child who, in his words, has to look after mother's mood. Winnicott had a special hatred for people who are always jogging babies up and down on their knees, trying to produce a giggle. This was merely their way of warding off their own sadness by demanding laughter from a baby who might have very different things on its mind. The primordial act of parental health for Winnicott is simply to be able to tune out of oneself for a time in the name of empathizing with the ways and needs of a small, mysterious, beautiful, fragile person whose unique otherness must be acknowledged and respected in full measure. Many of the parents Winnicott saw were worn down by their work. Winnicott tried to bolster them by reminding them of the utmost importance of what they were doing. They were, in their own way, as significant to the nation as the Prime Minister and the Cabinet. Winnicott called parenting the only real basis for a healthy society and the only factory for the democratic tendency in a country's social system. In his descriptions of what parents should do for their children, Winnicott was, in effect, referring to a term which he rarely mentioned directly: love. We often imagine love to be about a magical, intuitive connection with someone. But in Winnicott's writings, we get a different picture. Love is about a surrender of the ego, a putting aside of one's own needs and assumptions for the sake of a close, attentive listening to another person whose mystery one respects, along with a commitment not to get offended, not to retaliate when something so-called bad emerges, as it often does when one's close to someone, particularly a child or even an adult. Since Winnicott's death, we've collectively grown a little better at parenting, but only a little. We may spend more time with our children. We know in theory that they matter a lot, but we're arguably still failing at the part Winnicott focused on: adaptation. We still routinely fail to suppress our own needs when we're with a child. We're still learning how to love our children. And that, Winnicott would argue, is why the world is still full of the walking wounded, people of outward success and respectability who are nevertheless not quite real inside and inflict their wounds and anger upon others. We've a way to go until we're fully good enough. It's a task, Winnicott would have insisted, that is in its own way as important as any other.
Yeah, the concept of the good enough parent is so fascinating because we don't want to raise children that are too compliant. We don't want to be so strict on them. But also, it's really important to understand that we don't want to be too strict on ourselves either. Because in doing so, we're teaching children resilience, how to handle the frustrations, and how to solve emotional and relationship issues moving forward. Relationships are dynamic. It takes two to tango. So we want our children to learn their role and their responsibility for conducting healthy relationships. So we don't want to be too compliant with them, and we don't want them to have to be too compliant with us. Very, very interesting and important ideas. Okay, moving forward to a very widely accepted theory, and that is attachment theory. Attachment theory basically looks at, do we have a positive or negative model of ourselves, and do we have a positive or negative model of other people. So based on how we feel about other people and how we feel about ourselves, we can develop one of 4 attachment styles. Secure, which is what we are going to ensure with our proper interaction styles. Anxious, avoidant, or fearful. We're going to learn more about this in the upcoming video, but another important concept that we want to go over is that babies move through different attachment levels as they mature. So a baby up until they're about 7 months old is going to basically show the same response to anyone who shows them love and care, whether it be a nurse, a nanny, mom. They will start to differentiate between male and female, old and young. So they're kind of learning who has what capacity to fulfill their needs, like feeding and comforting. But after 7 months old, they will start to kind of fixate on a single person. And at this point, a lot of moms and parents will become nervous and maybe even a little bit sad and think, my gosh, my baby loves our nanny more than they do us. And it might even cause a little bit of depression. However, this isn't necessary. That stage will pass. And you really want your child to love your nannies ultimately, and they will ultimately come to love you as their parent because you're going to be the one who's there full time for them. So it's a kind of an unnecessary concern, but it does come up because you wonder, is this going to be permanent? But it's not, because just a couple short months later, babies start to develop independent and multiple attachments. So they develop different attachments for different people based off of what you're providing to them. And then by 10 months old, the baby usually has numerous attachments: parents, grandparents, nannies, other caregivers, siblings, that are all unique and specific to those people, and those will develop over the course of a lifetime. So it's really a pretty beautiful thing. But when it comes to attachment theory, we want to make sure early on that we are providing the unconditional sort of love and patience that they need initially. That's kind of the difference between like a maternal and a paternal sort of style of love and care, is that paternal is typically more conditional. It's when you do good, I'm going to reward you. When you do bad, I'm going to punish you, to put it simply. And then the maternal side is more unconditional. Good or bad, I'm always going to love you as much as I possibly can. And babies need both of those for development and a secure support foundation. But before babies develop into that year or so mark, they really just need unconditional love. Unconditional love from mom and dad and nanny. They need unconditional love because they haven't even begun to mature to the point to where they're going to be able to benefit from any sort of conditional love. So that's why attachment theory is so widely supported and accepted, even though, of course, there are detractors of all of these theories. But as a whole, attachment theory is widely supported because it does seem that this unconditional love is necessary for a baby to develop a healthy concept of self later on and a more general sense of well-being. Babies need to be loved unconditionally. Okay, with that important point being made, let's learn a little bit more.
Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Selena Benavides. Today's video is about healthy parent-child relationships. I'll be discussing how early caregiver relationships can have an impact on a child throughout their life and how you can ensure that you're developing a secure attachment with your children. First, a little bit about the science behind why the caregiver bond is so important. In the 60s, psychologist John Bowlby observed that the parent-child relationship had long-lasting effects on a child's social and emotional development. Mary Ainsworth research further supported the work of John Bowlby by determining that the amount and type of care, warmth, love, and protection from the parent to the child determine the type of attachment relationship that's formed. Starting in childhood, if we can trust that our caregivers will meet our basic needs like providing food, water, and protection, and that they'll continually give us love, affection, and connect with us emotionally, then we'll develop a secure attachment. However, if they're inconsistent in meeting our needs, maybe sometimes they're present for us emotionally and other times they're not, or they might be disengaged or distant from us, then we might develop an insecure anxious or an insecure avoidant attachment. The attachment relationship between the child and caregiver becomes a working model that sets the stage for how we give and receive affection in adulthood. It even has implications for our work relationships, our friendships, and our self-esteem. There are many benefits associated with having a secure attachment. Children who are securely attached are more likely to have higher self-esteem, better regulate their emotions, better able to problem solve and seek support when needed. They perform better in school, have healthier relationships, and are less likely to be aggressive or exhibit anxiety. I also have to share that I love the topic of attachment so much that we even named our dog Bowlby after one of the founders of attachment theory. So, what steps can you take to develop a secure attachment with your children? I have 4 strategies, but before I share, I want to give a reminder that developing a secure attachment really depends on how often and how consistently you engage in these behaviors. The first strategy is being responsive. This means listening to and responding to your child's needs. For example, you want to create a safe space where your child can feel free to express what they're feeling and show them that you'll listen and respond appropriately. This helps build trust and forges a deeper connection. You can do this by validating when children are feeling different emotions and offering support and comfort during those challenging moments. This is what will help strengthen the attachment relationship. The second strategy is consistency. Consistency is key, and there's 2 aspects to this. The first part is not only being consistently physically present, but also emotionally present as well. Because sometimes we can be in the same room as children, but are we on our phones or are we disengaged in the activity that they're doing? The second aspect of consistency is establishing consistent routines. When children know what to expect and they can rely on you for structure, they feel more secure. And in turn, this promotes greater autonomy and exploration. The next strategy is providing unconditional love and care. Children need to feel secure in knowing that you'll continually love and care for them unconditionally. So whether they throw a tantrum or bring home a bad test grade, it's really important that you communicate that your love is not dependent on their behavior, their achievements, or anything else. Quite literally, unconditional love means that your love is without conditions. It is ever present. The fourth strategy is in regards to separations. You want to assist in helping manage healthy separations. Of course, there are going to be times when you have to be separated from your children to go to work, school, or even run an errand. Some children are going to be more comfortable with separations, while others may be more anxious. And there's a few things you can do to help your children with these transitions. First, you want to prepare your child for what's happening in advance and affirm that you'll be back later to see them. You also want to follow an established routine for partying so that they know when and what to expect. Third, you want to give a brief but loving goodbye. And finally, when you're reunited, you want to make sure you have time to reconnect. Some children need a little bit longer to cuddle and embrace and share about their day. To recap, the attachment bond we form with our children has a lifelong implication.
All right, so jumping off from attachment theory, we have object relation theory, which is somewhat related. But object relation theory is a unique concept that we believe is important to how children develop. So essentially, children begin to see themselves in the world as they are treated, because when they first come into the world, they don't understand a concept of other. There is only one, and that one is their whole existence. And their whole existence is encompassed with the care they get, the needs they have, the comfort, the discomfort, the night, the day. It's all one world to them. They don't have a idea of a separateness of self versus other. So when children seem very upset and frustrated, just please understand that when they're very young, they don't even have the idea of another self. So don't take it personal. They're just being babies, trying to cope and exist and survive in a very scary world for a tiny little baby. So what happens is, as these children mature, they internalize how other people treat them to be their own self-concept. They see themselves based off of how they're treated. Their minds map how they're treated into their internal understanding of themselves. And then after they learn to have a self-concept, where you have this initial stage where the newborn's basically just looking for basic survival. The next stage is a fusion, where they are in their mind one with their caregivers. So they rely on them for need and support and fulfillment, but they don't even understand the separateness. And then around 10 months, that separateness, that idea of, oh, I have to get this person to come to me. This person is not me. We are two separate things, begins to form. And then that's when they start to really develop an idea of self. So then once that idea of self develops based off of how they've been treated, then you have the aspect of a dualism, where it's me and someone else. Someone else has their own needs and wants, and the baby starts to be able to understand that and empathize with that, instead of just having that completely egocentric worldview about themselves and everything around them. So what happens is, babies get treated a certain way. They internalize how they're treated to become their self-concept. Then they take that self-concept and they project it onto other people. And then that's how they treat other people. Now, we do advance past these stages throughout our life and we get more complex, hopefully, but that all depends on how well we are able to process these stages within the baby's development. So let's learn a little bit more. This is a fascinating concept.
Ever wonder why we repeat the same relationship patterns over and over again? Object relations theory suggests that our relationship patterns depend on three things. First, how we see ourselves: lovable, competent, worthless, or powerless. Second, how we see others. Just as we have a fundamental sense of ourselves, we carry a rubric of how others are, such as trustworthy, reliable, dangerous, or manipulative. The third is the interface between the two, where we may pull others to see us in a way we want to be seen and treat us we want to be treated. We tend to be most comfortable in relationships resembling the ones we were raised in, even when they may be toxic. Object relations theory further states that we acquire our view of ourselves and others from birth. Before we infants can recognize ourselves in the mirror, we put together a picture of ourselves through what we experience in our caregivers' interaction with us. For instance, if our parents consistently handle us gently, patiently, and lovingly, we begin to internalize ourselves as worthy of love and our caregiver as caring and trustworthy. However, if our caregivers are easily overwhelmed or abusive, we internalize that we are unlovable and our caregiver as unreliable or violent. In object relations theory literature, these internalized aspects of ourselves and our caregivers are called objects. The theory seeks to explain how the relationship between these objects or internalized representations of people play out in the real world. Lastly, these internalized templates of ourselves and others constructed in early life do not stay strictly demarcated. Thus, in addition to the role of helpless and unlovable child, a child growing up in an abusive household may later take on the role of violent father. To understand this theory better, let's look at a specific example. Bobby grew up in a chaotic environment. His dad was an alcoholic who beat his mom whenever he got drunk. In his early years, whenever infant Bobby looked into his mom's eyes, he saw someone overwhelmed and anxious. Whenever Bobby cried, his mom would get more frazzled and leave him alone. Since birth, Bobby began to internalize that he was unlovable and that his caregiver would abandon him if he expressed his needs. He also began to believe that others were fragile like his mom or dangerous, rageful like his dad. When Bobby got a bit older, he quickly learned to read subtle emotional signs of his father and be compliant and invisible whenever his father was drunk to protect himself. Bobby also learned to calm his mom and tend to her wounds. With practice over time in a chaotic environment, Bobby became skilled at reading emotional cues for potential conflict. He was quick to take on the role of compliant peacemaker and caregiver in relationships. When Bobby grew up, he frequently found himself getting into relationships with angry or demanding partners where he found himself in the casted roles that he grew up with. He longed for joys of a low-conflict relationship, but quickly became bored as there was no chaos for him to mediate. He also desires more affection and caring from his partner, but feels anxious or overwhelmed whenever someone attempts to care for him. At an unconscious level, Bobby would prefer to repeat the same relationship patterns that he grew up with, further reinforcing his internalized view of self as unlovable peacemaker and a view of others as either fragile or dangerous. Later, Bobby got married and had a child of his own. He frequently fought with his partner and hit his child, repeating the pattern of relationship that he experienced as a child. The only difference this time is that the roles were reversed. The object relations theory helps explain why Bobby, a child victim of violence, frequently becomes abusive towards his children. In summary, the theory suggests that all of us tend to gravitate to the familiar, even when the familiar is unhealthy or destructive. We are drawn to the type of environment and relationships that we are raised with. In the words of the child psychiatrist, Bruce Perry, we prefer the certainty of misery to the misery of uncertainty. To fix Bobby's unhealthy pattern of relationships, he will have to go back in time to dissect and dismantle his template for relationships and learn to be comfortable in the types of relationships he truly desires.
Okay, so that's going to wrap up our coverage of the different theories as they relate to the social and emotional development. Later on in the course, we will cover Piaget, who had some cognitive development theories. But for now, that's going to cover all the different theories and concepts we're going to look at regarding social and emotional development. But we do want to impress how important that emotional development is, because children, later on adults, have to be in an emotionally safe place in order to learn well and to process information and to grow in their knowledge base. So emotional well-being is vital. It's one of the key concepts that we hope you guys take away from this course is what you're doing and the interaction, the experiences you're providing to these children. It is not just the skills and the developmental abilities and the ability to count and remember their letters, but it's also you're setting their relationship abilities. You're setting their social and emotional well-being, including their ability to regulate their own emotions. This is all going to be very important in their development. And that really starts with the kind of attachment that you form with them and the kind of development that they start to achieve when psychological development begins, which is early childhood, 0 to 3. A lot of the different theories talked about, discrete stages that the kid moves from one stage to the next stage to the next stage. Others of them mentioned how the kid kind of just gradually progressed throughout these different stages. But there is overall a growth, and there's a change that happens in the human mind as it relates to the world and to others and to themselves. And a good caregiver relationship is essential to a child forming what they need to form in order to progress throughout life and to form healthy connections and to be able to be independent and autonomous and to be able to feel competent and secure in themselves and in their lives. So these are all so very important. They are the foundation of well-being. So that's why we focus so much time and energy on these. And so when we boil it all down and we look at, what are the attributes of a great nanny, it's similar, but we broke it down into 4 different ideas: patient, supportive, calm, and present. So those are the 4 main attributes that we want to see with our nannies at Thriving by Design Nanny Agency. These are what are critically important to us in ongoing support of the child. So when we look a little bit more into each one, we look at patient and supportive. So 100% patience is essential. The unconditional loving caregiver is necessary from 0 to 3. No questions, without a doubt. 100% patience is always necessary in order to help that child form a secure connection and secure attachment and a secure concept of themselves. We want to make sure we never abandon the child. We never retaliate to their behaviors, and that we're always ready and connected and there for them. So we want to be 100% patient and 100% supportive of a child through these years. Now, we're not saying that this is going to be always important throughout the course of their whole life, but from 0 to 3, it really is. This is essential for their well-being and development. And this is what we ask. We also look for supportive and calm nannies. So be the calm in their chaos. We're not asking you to do everything for them regarding being supportive, but let them, meet their own challenges. And when they need that extra little bit of help, if you can help get them over the hump, that's great. Show them the way over the hump, and then eventually they'll be able to do that for themselves. Or sometimes, it's okay to let them struggle a little bit and figure it out for themselves while you're there and available, so that when they do become frustrated, they can ask for a little bit of help. This isn't the stage to necessarily be developing that sense of grit and resilience and teaching them to just tough it out. This is the age to show them that they're supported and to teach them how to comfort and soothe themselves through the difficult times, and that help is available, whether it's, them drawing on their own resources eventually or drawing on the resources that are immediately around them, including their caregivers, nannies, and parents. And the last thing we'll talk about on this page is just being calm. Like we said before, be the calm in the chaos, but to be present. You don't always have to be high energy and directly on their level, serve and return 100% of the time. Sometimes you're going to be sitting back and letting them play and do their thing while you're close by, but just always be present. So watch them, listen to them, observe them, be connected to them 100% of the time that they're there and awake. This is developing their own sense of self and their abilities and their competencies in forming connections later on in life. And too often we see caregivers, parents even, on their phones, looking at the tablet, watching TV. And we're here to tell you that that's not ideal. That's not going to give the kid the support they need. And your attention and care from the years 0 to 3 are going to pay off for this child for the rest of their life. So from this time, from 0 to 3, these children need connection and support 100% of the time. Whether they're doing their own activities, we still just need you there in the room and attentive. Now, you can read a book, but we don't want you to be completely distracted with screens and TVs and the audio-visual distractions. Like we said, books are great, reading's okay. If you're just, reading something on your phone and you're still aware of the child, that's okay. But we don't want to see a bunch of scrolling, flipping from one page to the next page, being distracted. You need to be there. You need to be connected with these children so that they can form great interactions. That's how we've evolved to grow. That's how children have evolved to grow and flourish and thrive, is with a direct caregiver interaction. There haven't been TVs or screens or even books for thousands of years as children have developed their growth programs. The things that we are encoded to do when we're born is to connect with a caregiver. And if that caregiver is distracted, you are going to impede their development. So we just want to be real clear about that and what we expect and why we expect it. Hopefully you understand through all the lessons that we just went through. One last thing we want to end on with this module is what we were just talking about, is connection, but to really lean into it. It's not a negative thing when you lean into it. It's actually perhaps one of the most wonderful things in life, is having a great connection, and even more so with a child, with an innocent, loving, helpless little baby. Having a great connection with them is one of the best things in life, we feel, and we hope you do too. We're sure you do. That's why you're watching these videos, is because you do value that connection. So we want you to understand you are forming a bonded pair in us. So lean into that connection, grow to love the child. Don't resist those urges, give in to them. That's how it's supposed to work. Nature has built in these things to us, and just in the modern world, we've kind of gotten away from it, and a lot of different thoughts and concepts about self-love and things like this have, maybe driven us apart. And while there is definitely a place to practice self-love, and it is important, and we even have a whole lesson devoted to it later on in the course, we want you to lean into this connection with this child. This is fundamental. This is hard to express in words why it's important, or how exactly it is important, or how it works and what's the science, but we do know that it is important. Children need that bond. They have to have that bond in order to mature successfully throughout their developmental stages. So lean into it. This is what caregiving for a 0 to 3-year-old is all about, is that connection. So enjoy it, lean into it. Okay, and so that wraps up our entire module for the social and emotional development. We will proceed from here to a quiz. And again, these quizzes are, you can take them as many times as you need to, but you have to pass them so that you can unlock that next module. So good luck with that. And again, you can always reach out to us if you have any difficulties. Thank you.